Hello and welcome to Alan History Nerd. In today's video we're going to look at Thucydides and in particular his work, The History of the Peloponnesian War. This is to help A-level students doing A-level ancient history, in particular to help them with some of the AO3 aspect in this key Greek unit. So Thucydides was an Athenian. He wrote the history of the war between the Peloponnesians, mainly Sparta, and the Athenians and their empire. Beginning essentially right from the moment it breaks out, and he believed it would be such a great and important war that it was more worthy of relation to future generations than any war that had preceded it. So he kind of sees right from the moment this starts happening, like, this is a big deal. Now, the Peloponnesian War follows on from the Persian War, and this really is an important piece of work, not only because it tells us about this really interesting and important bit of history, but actually in the history of history itself. Because Thucydides is seen by many to be the father of history. He at least tries, and one of the bits I'll try and do a little bit of assessment or at least get you to think about is whether he succeeds in this, in being kind of taking an almost kind of objective, almost like scientific approach to history and trying to get to the truth of what happened, rather than simply relaying stories and reporting what people have told you, which we see in other sources from this time and earlier. So Thucydides is kind of the beginning of this kind of writing of narrative history, where someone, a historian, investigates, finds out the information, and then tells the story to the readers so they can understand the past. If you studied the Persian Wars already, then you will be used to using his near contemporary Herodotus, and you will notice that their work is decidedly different. Herodotus kind of just goes, "I've heard this. Isn't it interesting? There was flying snakes and ants as big as foxes, and this happened because the gods made it happen, and this happened because they ignored that god," and all that kind of stuff that you get in Herodotus, and you just don't get that in Thucydides. It's a far more kind of rational approach to history, and again, this is one of the reasons why it seems been so important, and he's seen as the father of history. Sadly, his work is incomplete. It kind of ends mid 411. It seems absolutely clear from his writing that he knew the end of the Peloponnesian War. So we think probably he's writing, or at least revising, his works after 404, but we're not absolutely certain. The understanding that he was held on has always been held in an Xenophon who continues telling the story at the end of the Peloponnesian War, kind of just picks up from where Thucydides stopped. So as I said, this video will aim to help students with that kind of AO3, that bit where you assess the source that you're using. And Thucydides, I would say, is the most important source for us in dealing with the Peloponnesian War. But remember, if you're doing AO3 in your essays, that the best AO3 is very tightly linked to the question and what you're asked to look at, and the particular events you're asked to look at and analyse. So just kind of generic AO3 about Thucydides, it will get you marked. We won't get you that very, very top level. To hit that very, very top level stuff, you need to kind of really kind of pin it and connect it to the events that you're talking about, the characters you're talking about, the question that you've been asked, etc. So a little bit about the life of Thucydides. So he was born in Athens somewhere around 460 BC, and he lived to about 400. He lived in Athens, he was educated in Athens, he fought for Athens, he contracted the plague in Athens, which he survived, whilst the likes of Pericles and many, many thousands of others didn't. He was also exiled from Athens, which was a very kind of common thing done at the time, as the ostracism, where people's names would be written on little broken bits of pottery and placed in the jars, and you get exiled for 10 years. There's a way of stopping anybody becoming too powerful, in a way of kind of punishing those who had done something wrong. And this, we think, the exile, had quite a big impact on him and his writing. There's a slight problem with all this of just treating Thucydides as an Athenian source. There's a suggestion from historians that maybe he was something else as well. So He owned gold mines in Thrace. His dad had a Thracian royal name. He retired to Thrace to write his books in exile. So was he actually at least partially Thracian as well? Was he not? It's not straightforward as if he is just Athenian. The exile bit is also really important in all of this because he doesn't spend all his life in Athens, and this means, well, with other sources you might kind of go, well, they know about Athens, but does he know anything about Sparta or the other places that he's talking about? Well, with Thucydides, we think he does. He actually goes and does his investigation, and he travels, and he goes and spends time in Sparta, etc. So we think it's not there's the extra layers to this, rather than he is just an Athenian source who just never leaves Athens. So he always intended his history of the Peloponnesian War to be a possession for all time, and absolutely got his wish, as we're still studying it today. And in 1.22, he talks about this, that this work is intended for future generations. As I've already mentioned, he believed that this war between Sparta and Athens was the most important war in Greek history, and therefore recording these events was a massive undertaking and a hugely significant and important one. He's very much based in the school of Greek rationalism, so he sought to find scientific explanation based on reasons for man's kind of place in the world. And again, as I've mentioned, this contrasts very much with Herodotus, who will always give kind of superstitious or things based on prophecy or oracles or gods. It will be kind of Herodotus' way of explaining it, whilst Thucydides is trying to explain it through the action of men and rationality. It's very much his own version of history, in which he selects what to cover. He doesn't offer alternative views. So if you're used to in Herodotus going, well, somebody told me this and somebody told me that, we don't get that with Thucydides. Thucydides kind of goes, well, this is what it was. So he's done that judgment bit before the reader, which is very much how narrative history is often, well, to this very day, is produced. But it doesn't give us kind of maybe quite that insight behind to go and pick holes in it. And so there is a degree, and I say this, a degree of subjectivity in this. This is his version of this history, but that would be the same if we were talking about any historian writing any history, I think. So I'm going to talk about Thucydides' methods, and well, I think probably the best place to start on that is Thucydides himself. So in 1.22, he says, with regards to my factual reporting of events of the war, I've made it a principle not to write down the first story that came my way, and not even to be guided by my own general impressions. Either I was present myself at the events which I have described, or else I heard from eyewitnesses those reports I have checked, as much thoroughness as possible. Not even so, the truth was easy to discover. Different eyewitnesses gave different accounts of the same event, speaking out of partiality for one side or the other, or else from imperfect memories. And he kind of honestly includes himself inside of imperfect memories, because again, early on he said, not being guided by my own general impressions. So this really shows he really has tried to take a hugely objective view on all of this, where he's kind of gone, well, I'm not just going to do what one eyewitness says. I'm going to check theirs against the other. I'm going to take into account that person's going to give me a hugely pro-Athenian account, or a hugely pro-Spartan account, or an account in favour of this person, or an account against that person. So he is trying to kind of address this in the way that historians always have, and hence this idea of him as the father of history. So this is very kind of commendable set of principles that he's got. I mean, one of the bits then we have to be mindful of is does he achieve this? And remember, it's him making the judgment about how reliable these different eyewitness accounts are. But if all he has is eyewitness accounts, then maybe again it's not a perfect method, but it is a kind of highly commendable one, and one which is at least trying to achieve a kind of an objective truth of what happened. And I think that this kind of self-awareness that his own memory and impressions might not necessarily be completely right to start off with, I think is really important in amplifying that idea of objectivity. So just to kind of pick up and put that into a kind of a series of bullet points as I've done. So he doesn't trust first impressions, even if they're his own. He kind of cross-examined witnesses to try and get to the truth of what had happened. So that might involve talking to multiple witnesses. We know that he talked to writers of prose and poetry and took into account all the stuff that they wrote. We know that he inspected written documents and stone inscriptions, the contents of which some stone inscriptions are included in his work. We know he went and examined buildings and walls and even graves. So the exile that he said that he suffered, again, when he's ostracized, this kind of really gives him time to investigate everything that's going on, and so we see that as an important moment. He shows a good knowledge of Sparta and its customs and some of its traditions and its way of life. So again, that bit where it's more than just an Athenian view. This is a guy who actually understands both sides in this conflict. He does appear to be, and from his own words, he is aiming to be as objective and accurate as he possibly can. One of the interesting bits, he goes, I think this is in 1.21, he kind of goes, he thinks that the interest in his work might be detracted from somewhat because he doesn't focus on things like romance, and he feared that this might make his writing a little bit dry for future generations. And there is an argument Thucydides is a bit dry when compared to the likes of Herodotus, with all its kind of myth and fantastical stories in elements of it. And you don't get that in the same way with Thucydides, but maybe that gives us an impression of a kind of a more accurate, more objective history. One of the most kind of discussed areas of Thucydides' work is speeches, and if you go to 1.22, again, there's more in there where he talks about his use of speeches. So again, if you want to go to his own words, which is always the best thing to do with all these things, and go find yourself some quotes, I would go there. There are about 140-ish speeches in his work. Some speeches he was present at or had transcripts of, because other people wrote transcripts of them as they were given. For some, he had first-hand accounts, but he didn't trust his own memory or the memory of others to get to the extent where he could say, "I've got this speech word for word." So he aimed on these speeches to kind of get a general message of the speech. And tried to be, again, he claims, to be as true as possible to the intentions of the original speaker, and trying to be as objective as he could. Now, for some of his accounts, there is no other account of the speech that he could go to, and so he kind of makes it up. He kind of goes, well, what I've done is I've written what I think best suits this situation for this person, and so I've written it for them. So there is a degree of subjectivity here. One of the frustrations in working with Thucydides' his history of the Peloponnesian Wars is you kind of go, well, is this one of the speeches where he's present at, or has a transcript of, or multiple accounts where we're pretty close to word for word, or is this one of the ones where he just kind of went, and I think there was a speech, let me write one. So he probably is pretty good at getting close to the style of it. I mean, there was certain kind of key bits in speech delivery, particularly amongst the Athenians in this period of history. But again, this is one of the bits where we're never 100% on solid ground. So is he objective and reliable? Well, he certainly had his favourites. Pericles, the Athenian leader, who he held above all others. Brasidas, the Spartan general, who he believed to be an absolute genius. It just happened to be the general whose victories led to Thucydides himself being exiled. He really disliked Cleon, the Athenian who was largely responsible for his exile, and is infamous for such things as the Mytilene debate. And was a kind of fairly coarse demagogue or rabble rouser was Cleon. So all this might have been because of his background. So Pericles, another aristocrat, he looks up to with kind of great esteem, and Cleon, who's from kind of more lowly born, he looks down on and sees as a troublemaker. This significant event, like his exile and his defeat or failure to get there in time to stop Brasidas, that might play into some of his opinions. All Athenian leaders failed to live up to the greatness of Pericles, notably Cleon and Alcibiades. I always pronounce it Alcibiades, but I'm not sure I'm saying it right at all. There is not this, however, is not necessarily particularly subjective, because if again you look at it objectively, Pericles is the leader at the height of Athens' power in the Athenian Empire, and then under the later leaders, it all collapses, goes horribly wrong, and they end up losing. So the idea that Pericles' leadership is better than the leadership of those who come after him is, you can go, oh well, maybe this is a subjective thing from Pericles, but from Thucydides, but I'm not sure it's subjective. Again, the evidence would support the history that he writes, where if they'd stuck to the policies of Pericles, Athens would have probably done a lot better in the war than it did. So there's some important things in that, and I think often students go looking for wanting to tear sources down. We have a limited number of very precious sources for us to use on this period of Greek history, and so it's always worth reflecting on the positives of what they bring as well, and not just kind of throw around and go, oh well, he doesn't like him, so this is completely unreliable, or this is completely subjective because he's bad mouthing Cleon. Well, Cleon does some really bad stuff, so that isn't necessarily horrendously objective history. His writing seems to hold some kind of warnings about the dangers of democracy when it appeals to the most base motives of humanity. He does seem to have some more broader stuff about human behaviour and how people should and shouldn't believe. I see this a lot with the way that we have the kind of the wonder of Pericles' or funeral oration, which follows on from the horrors of the plague. We've got the contrast between the Spartan worldview and the Spartan way of doing things compared to the Athenian way of doing things. We've got humanity at its best. We've got humanity at its worst through these stories. We see Athens treats other sea states and other peoples horrendously, and then suffers a horrendous fate itself. We see natural disaster like plague. We see see war. We see leaders. We see the whole kind of gamut of stuff in here, and I think it's not as straightforward as it is in kind of Herodotus, when Herodotus is trying to tell us moral stories about things. I think there's a degree of that in Thucydides. But again, and when looking at all of it, we must remember that he selects his sources. He wrote about what he believed was important. So there's often people gone back in and go, well, there's not more stuff on this, there's not more stuff on that. Well, there isn't. So it is his history of these wars, and it's his version written with knowledge of its result. So he does kind of seemingly decide that it's going to be really important from the moment he starts recording things. But we think the way that it's written suggests that a lot of it has at least been revised, if not written, after the event. And again, we're left with that frustration that it's not finished. So I hope that it has been helpful to you. I intend to crack on and try and get as many more kind of ancient Greek videos done as I can this year. So stay tuned to the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. There's loads of stuff on ancient history, but there's loads of stuff on more modern stuff as well, including Tudors and some stuff on Tsarist and Communist Russia, and stuff on the American Civil War, and stuff on Tudors, and all sorts of lovely stuff on there. There's also tons of A-level politics stuff on there as well. So if you're doing any of that and you're interested in looking at those, hopefully you'll find some stuff to interest you. Thank you very much for watching.